your host for this season of Amplify. It's the podcast for accounting firm growth. This season, we're focusing on business development and business development tech, how business developers are using tech to win. So today we're discussing sales enablement. In this episode, we'll talk to Sarah Dobek, president and founder of Inovatus, a national consulting firm that helps accounting firms accelerate growth through strategy, transformation, and technology. We will explore how enablement platforms equip BD teams to perform better. This is an episode you don't want to miss. So, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And before we jump in, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Awesome. Chris, thanks for having me, and thanks to AIM. It's exciting to be here. I've been a long-time AIM member. I started early in my career. Probably the most important thing to know at me and the angle that I come at as we have this conversation today is I've lived the life inside of a firm. I started my career inside of a small CPA firm. I did business development. I did marketing. I did operations for the firm. I always joke and say I did everything but finance. I just wouldn't touch that piece as a non-CPA. So I have a really practical lived experience that I like to focus on when we're talking about topics like these.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah. So let's just dive in and start. So first of all, let's start with a really basic question, which is what does sales enablement mean in a professional services context?
Yeah, I love that this term is becoming more commonplace in the accounting profession because I think it's a really important topic. And for me, the way that I define sales enablement, it's really about giving our professionals the confidence and the tools to communicate their value. It's about helping them show up better. In most of our firms, our partners and professionals don't necessarily identify as salespeople. They're advisors, and enablement isn't about, a set of marketing assets or sales assets that we're giving them. It's really about helping them become better at showing up as advisors and delivering on that. And yes, there are resources and there's platforms and there's tech that we'll talk about today that all support some of those things. But at the heart of it, I really focus on the word enablement, which is how do we help our people become better at what they're doing? How do we help them translate their value? How do we make this feel less overwhelming to them?
Sales seems to be a dirty word sometimes.
Yeah, it does. And I use it openly because we have to acknowledge and admit that what we are doing at some level of sales, it just needs to be reframed, the definition of what that means. That was the most valuable thing that my first mentor and boss ever did for me was reframe the word sales, because I thought it was an icky, nasty word. I didn't want to do it. I took a job in marketing, by the way, so that I could be as far away from sales as possible. The idea of that sounded terrible to me. And today I own a business, I teach and I train and I coach on this. If you would ask me 25 years ago, would you be sitting in this seat today? I would have said, absolutely not. There's no way. But it took somebody reframing it to help me realize what it actually meant.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. So tell me how you approach building and maintaining a sales enablement tech stack.
Oh, that's a great question. I think before we build a tech stack, one of the things that we really need to understand, and I think this is a huge opportunity for all of our growth professionals on the call, is you really need to understand what you need to build the tech stack around and how to support it. There's the obvious things that leadership needs, which is the reporting and the line of sight and everything, but we also need to understand how the firm sells. And I think that a lot of us go through sales training, and us included, there's general stages, but what I've realized is that when you bring the buyers in, the buyers drive the sales process. And if we don't understand that and have not catered that to them, and our tech stacks don't support that, or our sales process doesn't support that, we can't possibly begin to enable people. And so one of the places I always start, and this is a core philosophy on how I work, which is just get in and understand it. When I entered into this profession, and one of the things that's made me so successful all these years is I go through this deep level of curiosity. My partners used to shake their heads when I'd walk in their office, not because they didn't want to see me, but because they knew I was going to pose a question that was outside of the box, or that was truly trying to understand what something was. And they just, sometimes they didn't quite have the brain capacity to articulate it, but they needed to, right? Like the first time I was like, well, what's the difference between an audit compilation and a review? And remember my partner going, that's the smartest question somebody's ever asked me, right? And so being curious about understanding that sales process is an important step to getting to being able to build a tech stack or tools that support that. And I highly, highly encourage shadowing. I think it's one of the most valuable things our growth professionals can do, which is to listen in on calls, sit in on client meetings, just sit and observe and be really quiet and understand what that process looks like. As marketers in the room, like, we better understand when we have full context around what that is. But the other cool thing about tech today is all of that listening can be done with technology. So if we have firms that are using AI note takers, like anybody that's sat on a meeting knows I love my AI note taker. It's in almost all of my meetings. Well, we now have all of this unstructured data. And if we just sit back and listen to that and look at that information, we can learn a lot about those buying processes with our clients, information that might not have been available to us before.
Wow, fantastic. So it starts with a lot of questions, sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So which assets actually move the needle? Scripts, decks, case study sequences. There are many, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's a lot today. And I think some of it, again, goes back to what I was just talking about, which is what is that buying process for the clients, and what is it that they need, but also what do the sales professionals need? So the happy bridge here that comes in, I think, is really when we start talking about what those people need to feel confident in there, and then what the clients need to understand what the impact is that you're having. So to me, we've spent a lot of time on case studies lately. I think that's an obvious, but I also think it's an indication of how things are shifting and how buyers are changing the way that they're buying services. And a lot of that is being driven today by AI. Absolutely. And so much of the buying process is starting to transfer where people were required to come to our sites. A lot of that is being done online, and not just hey, what resources are out there and what firms are out there, but like navigating through the whole solutions process, matching to needs, all of that sort of stuff. And if our visibility is not there, they won't see us. But by the time they come to the site, there are at least people that are coming from II tend to have higher conversions that are out there. And so what that means is they're spending more of that time working through that buying process out there. So things like case studies, things like information and articles that help support that for your AI visibility will become even more important than it is today. I would say we're just at the very beginning of that journey. But the other thing that we found to be super important when we think about sales enablement, those case studies are really external pieces for the buyers, is what do the people need internally? And we've been spending a lot of time on really, really simple things with the firms that we work with. And some of that's, like last week I built a table to go into a proposal because the team members were having a hard time articulating the difference between planning and ongoing advisory work, right? They're selling tax services and they're doing it in a packaged way. And it just, they knew it in their heads, but they were having a hard time getting it out in a way that I think the prospect could understand it. And so we not only created that table to help articulate it for them so they could find a defined way to do it, but also give them a visual to put in front of prospects or clients when they were meeting with them. And that one thing just really helped them solidify their value proposition to the market in a very succinct and tangible way. And so I think a lot of times it's creating these very simple things and just listening to the challenges that they're running into. But a lot of that came in looking at their data. So, you posed the question at the beginning that a lot of this series is about technology. And one of the ways that we use technology is to see where the challenges are. And for this firm in particular that we've been working with, we've been seeing big issues on conversion on the front end and really changing the lead qualification process for that firm. But also issues once we get it delivered of like really focusing on the close and focusing how we're presenting on information to get more concrete closes, because things would go out there and they'd sit, and that's not an uncommon challenge in this profession. And so where we've been focusing on those tools have been in those areas. But the reason that we were seeing those issues is because of their CRM and their pipeline data and the ability to have some transparency into where those conversions were happening. And had we not had those tools enabled, or that line of sight with the technology, I'm not sure we would have been able to really start to hone in on some of these things in the same way.
Interesting. So you mentioned AI, and we all love our AI note takers, right? But how can AI personalize enablement content without losing the firm's brand voice?
Oh, I could probably spend 2 whole hours at least on this, but I think a lot of it comes down to knowing your firm and your brand and your messaging. And one of the things that's transitioned for a lot of firms is, if we're going to use AI, we have to have a core set of documents that are consistently refined and managed, that articulate what the core of who we are is. That starts in a sales enablement standpoint. That also starts with understanding who our buyers are, who our ideal client profile. So I see our ideal client profile as, who do we want to attract in the marketplace? What's important to us in how we talk about those clients and who we work with? Whereas our buyer personas, these are their pain points, right, that they're looking at, and what matters to them, and how does our brand positioning and our value proposition fit in with what they care about, and how do we message around that. But we have to be really clear on what that is, and it can't be vague. It can't be like, hey, we're great at client service, take our logo off and slap any other accounting firm's logo on there. Like, we need a story to tell about who we are. What is our brand promise? What are actual differentiators that the market would care about? Not just a list of features that we have, or a list of services that make us unique. And so when we have clarity in what that is, when we have clarity in who our buyers are, when we have clarity around who we're going after, not just a revenue range or like what they're willing to spend with us, but what does our ideal client profile look like? What are the attributes that make that up? What are the industries, the sizes, the demographic data? Now we can start to use that information to help AI support that, support messaging, get inside the mind of the buyer, pull additional information that would be valuable, help support competitive research. Like, when we talk about enabling people, without going through that foundational work and having somebody that can own and maintain it, you're not going to get very good information out of AI. AI isn't going to be very helpful to you. And when you marry that with great CRM data, the amount of information you get can be really powerful.
Sounds like you're saying you have to go back to the basics in a way.
You 100% do. And we see a lot of firms going back to that right now because of how important this brand messaging is, because there is so much noise and there's going to continue to be noise, but also to enable them to be better on brand. That's the cool part about AI, in my opinion, is that I think we're able to elevate our brands when we have a firm that can articulate what they need. The ability to elevate that from what has traditionally been brochureware in this profession to something that actually helps drive and support lead generation and connects with the buyers in a totally different way is really powerful. And we're starting to see that transition publicly in the market. Like, we're starting to see firms really play with that. And I'm excited to see where that's going to go, because I think from a lead generation standpoint and like supporting our firms in growth and enabling sales leaders to have those coming in, I think we're going to see a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, it's really cool to see. It'll be really neat to see how it goes. So what's one enablement tool or workflow you wish every BD team would adopt?
Gosh. So I think the first is, if we don't have a CRM system in place, I can't stress the importance enough today. This isn't just about having a place to have your contacts. I mean, 100% you need that. But this is a place to have a line of sight on relationships, to be able to see what is working. And ideally, it needs to fit in with marketing. Like, this isn't a just sales or just marketing initiative. This is a firm-wide initiative that also supports how we serve clients, what they care about, what trends are happening as it relates to that. But first and foremost, like, the things that I was talking about just a few minutes ago can't happen unless we have a line of sight on our pipeline. So if we can't see what's happening, if we can't see how long it takes to convert things, if we can't see where we're losing opportunities, and I'm sorry, but you're just not going to be able to see that level of data in an Excel spreadsheet, and the amount of human error that goes into that.
Mm.
is just too much to get reliable information out of it. You need it in a technology platform where you can also require the information that you need, but you need to also be able to report out on it in real time. It's not helpful if we find out a month later or 2 months later that we are down in billings compared to where we were this time last year, or down in closed business. What's that going to do, right, as we go into next year? It's not helpful to see whether we're generating more referrals or more expansion work with clients. It's not helpful to have all of that data be delayed, and you just can't see that real time and the amount of work that goes in, because trust me, I've built them into pivot tables to see all that information. It breaks, and you spend more time fixing it than you do
Mm.
actually working with the information that's there and being able to respond to that in real time. So I think that first and foremost. And then the second, really, if we're on a CRM system, is how are we using that information to better gather information about our buyers and start to segment that and really understand what that looks like. I really encourage firms to use note takers in prospect meetings. Again, that unstructured data that's going to come back, and how much we can learn from the buyers, that our advisors who never went into this to become salespeople are not trained to listen for you. You've got your rainmakers, your exceptions in the market, but the majority of them aren't. And so if you can put a really powerful person that's trained to listen into a different way, whether that's physically in the meeting or capturing this information, we've been able to pull some really cool information for firms on what's happening, even sentiment across clients, just from unstructured data that's happening in those meetings. And so, that would be a slightly more advanced tactic, but one I would encourage firms to really use as much as prospects and clients will allow it.
Great. So, how can marketing and BD teams align so that the enablement content is actually used in the field?
I think a lot of what we were just talking about, like the opportunity that I see, is being able to translate what we're hearing from the buyers and the prospects and what the team needs into usable tools. So we can do that in tons of different ways. One is that shadowing I talked about, like let the marketing team shadow, bring them along to sales calls, like do this a couple times a year, like pick these times, especially this time of year, where they go on these listings and their goal is just to listen. And you can tee them up and say, this is a member of our marketing team. They're here just to listen. We'd like to understand more about what our clients and our prospects are looking for from our firm. They may not have a speaking role. That's how I learned so much when I first entered into this profession, they'd be like, well, she's going to help us with the proposal, so she's here to listen, right? I didn't really care what they labeled me as. I was in the room and I could hear. The other is, if we do have that unstructured data, and if you are encouraging, requiring might be a strong word, but encouraging our people to use it, let them listen. I have things set up in our AI note takers that flag certain types of conversations that are happening. We flag testimonials that our clients are giving in these meetings so that we can go back to them. So like we're listening to and analyzing on a periodic basis that unstructured data to go and say, what are people talking about? What are their pain points? How does that match against our buyer persona profiles? What's changing in the conversations? And even like when we have more complex opportunities, we look and listen to those differently than we do maybe a standard tax conversation. So that is one way to align, but the other is just to have lots of conversation and openness, right? We have to break down that barrier between like, which one is better? They're not, they work together. In the right teams, we've seen this work. In the wrong teams, we're very territorial around what we're doing. And we think they can't possibly know what we need. Like all of it starts with conversation, but spend time to align that and to talk about these things. And that's what's usually not happening, is we don't have a day set aside to go like, here's what we're working off of on the marketing team. Here's what we have in all of our data. What is different, sales team? What are you hearing and seeing differently? And we see that as something that needs to be reviewed at a minimum of once a year. Now going forward, to say, here's how we build our campaigns. Here are the pain points. Here's what we're hearing. And if you can hear from your salespeople or check in with them, even if you can't sit and listen in the way that we described, like that's a great starting point to say, for them to validate it or go, here's some additional things that we've been hearing in our meetings. We want to do that. We want to check in and see it. If everything's great, good, keep moving forward. But if it's not, then that's an opportunity to tweak and align what we need to support the firm from an enablement standpoint.
It all comes back to communication, doesn't it? So often.
It does. It really does. It's one of those darn pillars that just doesn't seem to go anywhere.
Right. For a reason, for a reason. So what are the biggest gaps you see between marketing content and BD needs in accounting firms?
Well, I think marketing talks again to the markets. This is external, and then BD is talking to the humans, but the enablement piece is a bridge. And I still think that the biggest gap right now is in enablement. So, you know, how do we take and translate a campaign that we're doing externally? Maybe we're trying to, we just went through what people are affectionately calling OB3, right? The new tax law change, and how does that translate to how we talk about it with our clients? There's gaps in where the confidence level is of people that are there, and so how do we not just talk about and run a campaign externally, but how do we support them when they get the calls in? How do we make sure they have the information they need, whether that's a tool or a resource or just an internal training to talk about what those things are? I go back to sometimes it's the very simplest things that can help them feel more confident in what it is that they're doing. And so being able to translate that, whether it's a thought leadership piece to something that's like, here's what you would listen for, here's how you might respond, or here's who the person you would talk to if you don't know how to answer a question that a client poses to you. Like, I've gotten that before. Like, I don't know who to go to in the firm for this, or I don't think we have an expert on this. And I'm like, nope, wait, we do have an expert. Here's who you go talk to. It's tiny things like that boost confidence and their ability to do things. And so that gap that I see is oftentimes an enablement of translating between the external market focus and how we internally align to support whatever it is that we're going to market to sell around.
Okay. So last question I have for you is, how do you measure success for sales enablement in a world where sales isn't always direct, as you mentioned?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I think there's a couple ways that we can look at that. One is I like to see how people show up, like behavior wise. So one of the things that I look for, especially when we're looking at enablement, is has it enabled somebody to go and do something that they weren't willing to do before, or done so with more confidence. Sometimes that translates to revenue. Sometimes it means just having a conversation with a client. Sometimes it means reframing their mind around maybe writing off that referral source that we didn't think was going to be valuable, who's now turned into be the most valuable referral source for that person, simply because they were willing to take a meeting that originally they had perceived as something different. So some of it shows up in behavior, but a lot of it is like how willing we are to adopt those things, and have meetings or bring up topics to people and have conversations with them. We can see some of it translate in the example I shared earlier with the simple table that we put into a proposal, right? If they are consistently using that resource and that tool and they feel good about it and they feel more confident, we'll ultimately see wins out of that. Can I say it's that one thing in that proposal? No, but the fact that they're willing to use that proposal and they're willing to use that and pitch more on that and bring that to the prospects tells me that that tool is working. And so a lot more of this is about behavior and adoption around certain things, sometimes less about revenue, although we can find all the ways to track it back to revenue in some of those. And we have lots of, examples, but I don't know that there's like a dashboard that I could point to, because it depends on where each person is in their individual journey around business development, because that's what we're enabling is the person in that moment at their space and meeting them where they're at. It's not like globally there's, like everybody's in the same spot.
Right. So true. Thank you, Sarah. This has been really informative, and I super appreciate you coming out and sharing your knowledge with all of us. So tell us where people can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Inovatus, INOVAUTUS.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn under Sarah Johnson, my maiden name, that's out there, but you can find me in both places. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Yeah, great. Also, do you have anything upcoming that we should know about? Any events or?
Yeah, we'll be traveling quite a bit, but we are looking at doing a webinar in January. I don't have an exact date yet established for that. It'll be end of January. We usually do it on the Outlook. And then next year we will be doing our biannual growth outlook survey. So if you're interested in either one of those things, head out to our website. Make sure you're signed up for our email list because that's how we initially publish that, or you're following us on our LinkedIn page. Those are the two places that will publish that information.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Lots happening. So that's it for another episode of Amplify, the podcast for accounting firm growth. Big thanks to all of you for listening today. And again, to Sarah for the engaging conversation. If you like what you heard, we'd love a review on the podcast platform you're listening to us on now. Be sure to listen to the other episodes this season. Again, our theme is business development and business development tech. You can learn more about Amplify and our past seasons on accountingmarketing.org. Look for the podcast under publications. If you want to connect with me, reach out on LinkedIn. Thanks again, and we look forward to having you join us for another episode soon.